Hi, Jordan. How you doing?
Hello, hello. Doing well. Yeah. How are you?
I am very well. It's early here in Japan, but it's kind of nice because nobody's up in my house yet. So I want to start. We initially connected on Twitter. I had been following High Existence. Are you still involved with that project?
Yeah, in more of an advisory role. I've stepped back from the day to day and yeah, to focus more completely on projects that I completely founded, but still an advisor for High Existence. Yeah.
So yeah, I had originally. It's one of the only newsletters that I still, pardon me, that I still subscribe to. And so I had been following you on Twitter, and you've been posting some interesting things specifically around coronavirus and maybe some of the liberties that we are now giving up. And just talking, you had said, you're a little bit concerned that this is something that we're doing, and I myself is concerned. And I think somebody else chimed in and said, I think you're crazy. We need to do this right now. People need to stay home. And so I wanted you to give you some opportunity. Let's start the conversation there about what you think are the risks of putting in some of these more strict stay-at-home orders.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. Um, well, I think most fundamentally, it's really crucial for people to acknowledge that no human monkey mind truly knows whether it's ultimately going to be better or worse to implement a super massive sweeping global lockdown. It's just like, who could possibly begin to plumb the depths of that calculus? Like, anyone who claims that they have is fooling themselves. There are literally infinite variables to consider here. And so anyone who's like, yes, I've got it all figured out and I know for sure that this is the right answer, is delusional. And somewhat unsettlingly, we've seen in the wake of this entire series of events, we've seen huge numbers of people, probably millions of people, just basically jumped straight on the mainstream bandwagon and just said, yes, we need to save lives. This is definitely the best course of action. Everybody lock yourselves at home indefinitely. And a lot of people just didn't really question this, which I found unsettling, because I saw that side of the argument, sure. But then, I also from the get-go was really thinking about, okay, well, what are the massive unforeseen implications of a global lockdown on this scale going to be, such as, initiating a second Great Depression, causing tons of people to lose their jobs, lose their businesses, massive economic despair, potentially people starving, going hungry, people being in isolation, mental health issues, family issues, domestic abuse. I mean, when you start to look at the potential consequences of a massive global lockdown, it's really not clear at all whether it would have been better to, just tell vulnerable populations to isolate or be careful, versus having such a massive number of people globally go into this lockdown state. And so, yeah, it's like, those are some of I just listed some of the potentially negative consequences that I see of the lockdown. The other thing is, to what extent are we reconditioning the global populace to shift into a culture that's just much more paranoid, much more fearful, much more self-isolating? Are we seeing like a massive reduction in hugs and big events in our lifetime as a result of this? Are people just generally going to be more afraid? Are people going to be much more susceptible to governments like clamping down and implementing increasingly authoritarian measures from a kind of medical martial law standpoint? Like, this is justified because we have to save lives. It's just, people are so manipulatable when you push that fear of death button and kind of twist a little bit. And so, yeah, those are some of the things that have been ricocheting around in my noggin in relation to this whole thing.
Well, being in Japan, I have a little bit, we haven't essentially shut things down. And yes, the Prime Minister Abe, he called state of emergency, I think on April 8th, which was more about funding, being able to allocate funds in different ways. But all of the, except for a few of like pachinko, which people are just basically, it's like gambling, sitting in front of a machine for hours inside, karaoke boxes, basically it's voluntary if you want to shut down or not. And they actually don't have the authority in their constitution to be able to say, hey, we're going to start fining you. This needs to be mandatory if you're not paying. It's kind of like, this is what we would like you to do. Please do it. And to me, it's been much more measured. So some, you walk down the street, some places are closed, a lot of them are still open. One of the things that is widespread here, though, is mask use. Again, voluntary. I've seen footage in the States of them like ripping a man off the train because he wasn't wearing a mask, or having tip lines so you can call and, rat on your neighbor. That kind of stuff to me is crazy. But the reason that it works in Japan is that there's a lot of reasons. I mean, it's 98% Japanese, right? So in that whole narrative of us versus them, everybody's us here. Well, not me, but and they also have a lot of collective memory of having to pull together. I mean, they have a ton of typhoons and earthquakes in Fukushima and World War II, and so there's a lot of instances where they have had to pool together, work together, and fix things. And it's actually pretty amazing how quickly that they can go and, like a bridge will get knocked out in a typhoon, and like within weeks it's built back up. It's just amazing how effective they are. So there's that, but they also have a value of like they have high value on social harmony and group consensus. So they really, it doesn't benefit, what benefits all benefits the individual as well. And so there's that sort of mindset that doesn't exist in the US. So when I was kind of preparing for this conversation, I was like, okay, I kind of want to go back and look at like the philosophy of social contracts. Because, the Declaration of Independence and stuff was largely based on the philosophers, John Locke and Rousseau. And so what I think that we miss in the United States is that, yes, you are given freedom from tyranny from your government and from government overreach. But with that also comes along with duty and obligation to your fellow man. So there's, yes, you should be protected from government overreach and all of that. But at the same time, this life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is extended to everyone. And in groups, you have to live in a way that you're not interfering with somebody else's ability for that. So part of me kind of thinks that if people were a little bit more honoring of that regard of the social contract, the welfare of each, taking care of the welfare of each other, we would need way less government interference, ripping people off trains and having, tip lines to rat your neighbor out. That to me is just insane. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you were speaking, what came up, I was thinking about Sweden as another example. Like you brought up Japan as kind of, they're doing things a bit different and it's working well. I know Sweden, they didn't implement a lockdown and people kind of went about business as usual, but I think told vulnerable populations to isolate or so, and they haven't seen numbers that have been higher than elsewhere, and they've avoided a lot of the worst consequences. I I think you're right that if people had more of a sense of kind of a duty to their fellow man in the United States, then that could be seen as or that there may be less justification for authoritarian interventions or clampdown, but I'm not sure how relevant that is in this case, at least, just because I feel like authoritarian clampdown and like people, you know, getting ripped off trains for not wearing a mask or ratting on each other for not wearing masks, that all feels to me like major overkill for the situation we actually find ourselves in. I mean, we're in a situation where we're dealing with a virus that the vast majority of humans do not have. 99%, you know, some unknown super high percentage of people survive this thing, and yet we've begun behaving as if like the ultra black plague that's going to kill everyone has been released among us. um so I don't know, I feel like toxic governmental structures, like kind of like if a government has a sickness kind of within it, it's going to find excuses to try to implement further measures of control, no matter what, really. And so I don't know if it's as much about like we individuals need to have more of a sense of obligation to our fellow man, and then our government won't have to be such dicks to us, as much as just like we need to really ruthlessly and vigilantly keep tabs on our governments and realize like we are allowing these people to lead us. We're implicitly or explicitly like allowing them into power. What is this process, and how is it producing these bodies of people that, you know, many of whom like are questionable leaders to say the least. And is this entire political structure just like sick to the core anyway? Is it so sick that it actually just needs to be, you know, beheaded so that we can like birth like a new paradigm political system that actually is remotely caught up to the historical moment we're at, rather than having been birthed 300 years ago and then like, you know, retrofitted with all these attempted add-ons, but ultimately just poisoned by a huge amount of corruption and a huge amount of like you know, oh, what's the term, like you know, crony capitalism and stuff like this, with capitalists just kind of buying and selling politicians basically. So I don't know, those are some things that come up in relation to that.
So I absolutely agree. I would like to see a completely different system. And I also agree with you that it's hard to gauge what the actual risk is. One, because this is kind of happening in real time, it's something new, but also because I feel the media has been really complicit in just catastrophizing everything, especially over the last 3 years. But, you know, this has been a trend basically for quite a while. So when you have something, you know, for the last 3 years where everything is hyperbole, everything is the biggest deal ever, and then you actually have something that legitimately is of concern, all of our sense making apparatus, like all of that is malfunctioned. Like we have no um, way to discern and say, like what's reasonable here? What, you know, okay, maybe social distancing, staying home for a little bit. You know, we were slow on the draw at the beginning. Maybe that's reasonable that we all spend 2 weeks at home until we get a better handle. But the, like you said, the climate now is so corrupt and it's so toxic that you know, somebody could come up with a good idea, but if it's not a red idea and you're a blue guy, it doesn't, you know, it's not even hearable, or vice versa. It's not just, I think it happens on both sides of the spectrum. And I don't know, you know, when we talk about the whole system needs to change, how do we get there? Because I love having these conversations, because I really want to see, you know, I think I came into this world looking at this and saying, what, this is, we're here for more. Like this whole idea of the white picket fence and the American dream, and you go to school and then you fill your house with shit and then you get more shit and then you travel, and, you know, like I was like, this can't be what it's about. And yet I don't have any idea how we get from um, realizing the toxicity and the corruption and, you know, just the general failings of this whole thing as it stands, and birthing something new.
Yeah, I have some ideas about that. So that it's the the core of what I want to say is encapsulated really well by the Buckminster Fuller quote: "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. You always change things by building a new model that makes the existing model obsolete, or building a new paradigm." And so it's not to say that we don't need some people attempting to like fight and break down the old system. Although generally I find that people too much engaged in that just end up in a new kind of us versus them war that with its own like rivalrous dynamics and its own like huge resentment, and they get locked into the same kind of dualistic squabbling paradigm that has characterized human history for several thousand years. So what I see is the more powerful creators and visionaries are actually focusing on building new institutions, new communities, new cultures, new organizations, new businesses that are rooted in a fundamentally different paradigm and way of doing things. Um, and so a lot of these people are entrepreneurs. You know, they're people that are starting things, starting new communities, organizations, businesses. I think I think the way to begin to birth the next thing is to stop spending so much time trying to fight the old and start spending our time really deeply feeling into, okay, what is wanting to be born? What does the more beautiful world look like? What does the sustainable regenerative world look like? How will society be organized? What will these decentralized utopian regenerative eco villages look like, and how can I start building one tomorrow with some of my friends? This type of thinking, if we can start to actually turn our energy away from fighting the cancer and instead toward like building the antidote, if we can channel our energies into visualizing, like going in the visionary realm, seeing what comes next, and then actually like grounding those lofty visions in real world action, and building containers, whether that be like physical communities or businesses, where we can start testing new paradigm principles, start testing good ideas from wherever they come from. We can transcend the stupid red versus blue that you're talking about, the traditional political spectrum. We can just say, look, I'm open to good ideas wherever they come from. Let's test them out in these test tubes and see what works. And then let's gradually scale up what works well and what produces the type of world we actually want to live in. And then as that as such a paradigm actually becomes demonstrably real, as there are more and more people living in a new paradigm, and there already are more and more people doing this, more and more people creating these new kind of humanity 2.0, like new earth type of communities and businesses and cultures and civilizations, like it's happening, it's being born. And as we reach a critical mass that are living in that new reality, then that new reality starts to actually gain mass appeal, because it starts to it's just demonstrably better and sexier and more beautiful than the old. And then you start to see like a mass migration in that direction. So maybe that still seems a little too abstract. I tried to ground that, but I feel like that's my general sense of how it happens.
Yeah, that's funny you talk about that Buckminster Fuller quote. That's actually, I put a new quote on the front of my website all the time, and that was the one I just put on there like 4 days ago,
mm,
about making the old systems obsolete.
Synchronistic.
Well, you see, I found that even stuff that you had been writing on, has been in my brain. I just did a podcast yesterday about rites of passage, and you had recently wrote an essay talking about how this is kind of humanity's rite of passage. And I, you know, I love, like I said, I love talking about this stuff, and it makes me feel hopeful. And then I'll go, and I know better, but I'll go on Twitter and you just see, I mean, there's some bright spots. That's how you and I connected. And I've actually connected with several other people the last couple of weeks, but it's just, yeah, there's just so many people getting wrapped up in, like, all the people who, when Trump does what Trump does, and then, there's 35,000 people, yelling at him. And I'm like, just like he said, like, why fight that stuff? Like, he's
He's a
just,
master troll, eh?
he
He's a
is,
master troll.
and you're not going to change him. And the fact is, Trump is just a really ugly face on a broken system. Like, that system was still shitty when it was Obama, but he was a much better speaker. You know, like, there's he's just in a way just bringing out, he's making it impossible for us to ignore, but that doesn't mean that we have to feed into it. Like you said, finding ways, however that is for you, to shift your energy into something else, something that's more productive, something that promotes the world you want to see and isn't always in that that fighting. Because if you keep fighting, that's exactly what we get. We keep staying stuck in that energy over and over again. And I got to say, though, that's kind of, I find it difficult sometimes to not take the bait, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're constantly being tested, and the same patterns will just keep repeating on the micro and macro scale, in the individual life and in collective reality. The same patterns in life just keep repeating, and life keeps slapping you in the face in the same way until you learn the lesson that is attempting to be conveyed, and then you shift into a new paradigm. So, collectively, we are locked into these rivalrous dynamics, this game of finger pointing, this kind of mass victim consciousness, and just wanting to identify the bad guys and point a finger at them and say, they're the bad ones, they're the ones fucking everything up. We just need to shut them up or censor them or kill them, and then everything will be okay. It's like, come on, people. That's what people have been saying for thousands of years. It never worked. War just perpetuates more war. There's never been a war that actually achieved peace. You achieve peace by ceasing to create war internally, breaking the cycle, starting to choose to resonate at a frequency of peace, choosing to see no enemies anymore, seeing that everyone is basically an extension of you or a reflection of you. Anything you hate in someone else is something that you hate within yourself, that you're not owning within yourself. When you do that super deep shadow work and you integrate all that is, when you integrate the entire world, that's when you start existing in a new paradigm that's more based on unity consciousness, and you can stop wasting so much energy, pouring all this energy into this game of duality and this game of tribal squabbling, and you can start playing a new type of game. You start playing like the omni win-win infinite game that we're hopefully like moving toward. But it is difficult work. It's like the tests are constant, and we are the trolls are everywhere. Everyone, so many people are like unconscious kind of agent smiths, like basically trying to like they see, or like unconsciously they're like, there's this parable of like lobsters in a bucket and how you don't need to put a lid on the bucket, because when one of the lobsters starts to try to crawl out, the others just naturally grab it and try to pull it back in. Tons of people, when you start to break out of the duality, resentment, victim consciousness game, they just become these unconscious Agent Smith lobsters, and they start trying to sabotage you and pull you back in and say, hey, you're not agreeing so much with my worldview anymore. What's going on? Something's wrong with you. I can see that something's really wrong here. And you have to have the centeredness and the groundedness in your own being to be like, no, what's there's nothing wrong here. I'm actually just rising into my true power and seeing what I really am, and seeing that there's no separation between me and anything else. And I'm beginning to move into a fundamentally different paradigm than you're in, and you're having a strong reaction to that because it brings up unresolved emotional energetic gunk within you, and that is your shit to deal with. That's not mine, sir. But it's not easy at all. It's hard, but that's part of what makes it so fun. It's a great challenge. Like, what a beautifully designed game this is that we're playing. Like,
Well, that's actually that. This will be part of the podcast. I have a segment called The Divine Spectacle, where it's not you and me, it's me and we, because of exactly what you're saying. That's so often what we're seeing, because everything is ultimately connected. And yes, we do our own work, but then everything is a reflection of something that's going on larger than ourselves. So I love what you said about to stop war, we have to find that peace within ourselves. And yeah, I agree. It's difficult but necessary work, and I enjoy your framing of looking at it as a challenge and saying, yeah, like, bring this on. This is really cool. I want to talk a little bit more about authority. And I see this often. I see this often too, and I know this is part of my own stuff when it's so easy to say, "Oh, that's pseudoscience," or "That's been debunked," or "You're a quack," or even now with just the specialization. Okay, you might be a doctor, but you're not a virologist, or you might be an MD, but you're not an epidemiologist, and how we're kind of like batting around authority and deciding what is truth, but in a really bizarre, hyper specific way. And to me, having people who can look at things in great detail is fantastic, but you also need to have people who can see the high level stuff. You can see people who can understand the systems nested in with systems. And with something as global as this is a global pandemic, uh, things, environmental, economic, mental health issues, physical, like there's so many things coming together that to just dismiss people so easily, and then on other hands give this person godlike authority, seems very strange to me. What do you make of all this?
Yeah. So I think our culture, the modern global Western monoculture has a pathological problem. I would say one of the largest issues confronting modern Western civilization that we need to surmount is a pathological over attachment and overvaluing of experts and authority figures and of scientists in general. Honestly, I'll go as far as to say that. Now, let me unpack that a little bit. It's like we our culture conditions us so deeply to outsource our own fundamental power, our own innate wisdom, our own truth. It tells us from like the very, very early days that there are experts out there. They have already found the answers. They're the geniuses. They wrote the textbook. The answers are in the back of the textbook. Your opinions don't really matter. Your truth doesn't really matter. You just need to memorize the opinions of the experts and spit it back out on the test at the perfect moment. And that's all that matters. And this continues to play out to an even more severe extent as one goes farther in education, paradoxically. Like for a lot of people in academia and in university, they spend their entire university careers being told, yeah, we don't want your opinion on this or your truth. What we want is you to just find as many expert sources as you can and then form the most pure logical argument that you can to connect these sources. And that's all we want. We just, leave yourself out of it. And it's this really bizarre cult of expertise, and it's actually like a cultural neurosis where we don't want to look at the fundamental mystery of reality. We don't want to look at the capital M mystery, which is constantly on some level speaking from the depths of our being, telling us, oh, little monkey, you don't know shit, and none of the other little monkeys know shit. You motherfuckers, like you think you could have a conceptual map that could somehow contain reality in all of its infinite intricacy and vastness and majesty. Silly monkey. That is absurd. And yet we really, really don't want to plunge into mystery and plunge into uncertainty, even though on the other side of that is actually like a level of power and at homeness in the mystery and in being that we actually deeply crave, but we're afraid of going into the abyss and going into mystery. So we erect whatever structures we can to kind of keep the mystery at bay and convince ourselves that we've got a solid handle on reality and that we have certainty. And one of the major ways that we've done this is through the dogma of scientism, where we've basically said science is we've basically made science a new religion, and we've declared like the scientists are the priests on high bringing us the final answers. Just listen to the ones in the lab coats and their sacred writings and the scientific papers. It's like, yes, science has value. Science has a place. It's one of the most powerful and useful tools that we as humans have ever invented. But if you pay any attention to the history of science, you see that it's literally a history of constant revolutions and constant paradigm shifts where the current orthodoxy is constantly being overturned. And true science never reaches a conclusion. True science is a process of perpetual refinement and perpetual updating. And so when you see people latching on to the current scientific orthodoxy and the current body of scientists and saying, and, you know, kind of like bowing down and worshiping them and saying, yeah, the scientists have it figured out. Like, we've pretty much got reality figured out here. Just listen to the guys in the white coats. Like, be very, very careful with that, and start to observe how that is symptomatic of a culture that systematically acculturates and conditions its citizens to give away their power, to not honor their own innate sense of what's going on, their own instincts, their own intuition, their own embodied pulsing sense of truth, that just conditions them to give it all away, to give away all that power and give away their truth and authority to external experts. This is part of a, like, whether or not it was deliberately designed, it functions perfectly as a kind of mass control system that basically just conditions everyone to see themselves as kind of, you know, dumb, not so smart, like just some people who need to just kind of slot into someone else's agenda and stand in line because all the smart experts over there have it all figured out. We'll just let those guys figure out what the truth is and tell us. And me, I'll just listen to the authorities and stand in line and slot into someone else's agenda and go through the motions and live a kind of Groundhog Day life for 50 years and do what I don't truly want to do. It's all interrelated here. And the, like, authority, expertise, scientism piece is, I think, a big part of the current kind of pathology of Western civilization that one needs to begin to dissolve and snap out of if one wants to really reclaim one's sovereignty and power during these strange times.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's so easy too. You were talking about the people who are just kind of like fall in line, and they also are actors for that system, because it's so easy to just say, "Oh, that's been debunked," or "You're not an expert," or "You're a crank." And it's funny listening to you talk about academia. I went and I got my undergrad, and the whole time I was like, what? Like, I was so disillusioned. I was like, I'm not allowed to share any of my own thoughts. Like, basically, I just become a master, at citation. And that was so weird to me. And it was actually at the same time I did my first training in Reiki. And I've kind of moved beyond that, but it was my first kind of like gateway into the energetic world. And so at one side of my life, I couldn't do anything without citing it. And on the other side, I'm just like opening up further and further to this mysterious world that I didn't even know existed. And I'm having these, unexplainable, uncitable experiences. And I was like, this is really crazy to me. So I decided in university that I would volunteer for as many research studies as I could in as many disciplines as possible. So forestry, psychology, computer integrated systems, like, I don't know, probably like 25 different disciplines that I went. And I'm like, this is bullshit. This is how you decide what truth is, by this looking at this one little aspect that doesn't exist. Like, nobody exists in this little box in the real world. We have all of those variables that we're factoring out in our lives. We're complicated, messy, and dynamic. And this doesn't even make sense to me. So it was just such a weird dichotomy of like living in this world. My undergrad's in exercise physiology, and then at the same time just opening up. And I've talked a lot before about the importance that the mystic or spiritual seeker, or whatever you want to use, what an important role they have right now in this time, particularly to break some of those bonds of, kind of the making science into God almost. That we need to have people who are willing to explore and walk in the unknown and take what they gather from those other places and embody it in this 3D world, so people understand. I was having this somebody was making fun of energy medicine that I was following on Twitter, and I really wanted to just be there, like, I've studied this. I actually am trained in Reiki, healing touch, and reconnective healing. I've looked at the science, although I don't particularly care about it. Like, that's not from where I do my work, right? That's not how I engage in the energy, is like, well, science says this is possible. So, and I honestly just put it out there. I said, kind of like, ask me anything. I'm willing, like, if you have a question, if you don't understand, if you really want to engage in a good faith conversation, and maybe look at something that you dismissed as, you know, quackery or whatever, like, let's have a conversation. And nobody took me up on it.
Wow. Yeah, there's also just such a dogmatic thought police patrol with the current scientific orthodoxy. There's like a whole wing of the scientism community that are almost like the new science Bible beaters, where they've taken it upon themselves to attempt to discredit and deplatform and smear any renegade scientists that are delving into more mystical territory or delving outside the current orthodoxy. You know, the Terrence McKenna's and the Rupert Sheldrake's and the Tim Leary's and stuff like this. And this has become so commonplace for the current scientific orthodoxy kind of thought police squadron to just completely discount and dismiss vast swaths of human experience, everything in the areas of the paranormal and the mystical and spirituality and purely internal subjective experiences, as if there's most definitely a single objective reality, which science just current scientific orthodoxy just assumes. Which, you know, if you have a few mystical experiences, it becomes less and less obvious that that's the case, and it seems strange to just take that as a fundamental axiom. This kind of thought police frequency has permeated a lot of the community of rationalists and people interested in science, to the point where they may not even realize that they've unconsciously just become allergic to anything that smells at all like woo or is related to spirituality. I mean, I know because I used to be this exact way, so I can empathize. Like, I had my kind of rationalist phase where I was just really dismissive of everything like Reiki and tarot and astrology and paranormal experiences and you know, extra dimensional entities and telepathy and humans gaining certain like spiritually realized humans gaining certain like powers that most people like have not unlocked within themselves, things like this. I used to be much more dismissive of that, and then I actually delved into those worlds and had like direct experiences of a mystical nature, a lot of those experiences. And I came into direct contact with levels of intelligence in this reality that just vastly dwarf the presumptuous monkey mind. And my entire reality began to crumble, and I began to realize, oh my Lord, what we're dealing with here is just infinitely more labyrinthine and origami-esque and textured and layered than the current scientific maps even come close to describing. Like, quantum physics is probably like the best current kind of finger pointing at the moon within science that actually starts to point toward, you know, the mystical and the just infinite kind of technicolor kaleidoscopic labyrinth of strangeness that really is this reality. And even that is just totally insufficient to actually encapsulate reality, because it just goes back to that fundamental axiom: the map is not the territory. So many people invested in science just truly do not realize that no conceptual map can possibly contain reality, not even close. And yet these people are pounding these conceptual maps saying, we've got the truth right here. And it's like, motherfucker, all you've got is like a bunch of chicken scratch on some parchment. That's not the truth. Like, holy shit, look at the moon. Wait, do you truly even think you know what the moon is? No, none of us even truly know what the moon is, because in order to, it's like Carl Sagan said, in order to bake an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. None of us even know what the simplest thing is, because to create anything, you have to trace it all back to the very origin of all that is. And science just, you know, dismisses that origin with this like mythological story about the Big Bang, and it's just like, yeah, just, you know, grant us one miracle and then the rest makes sense. And it's just, when you start to see through it, you start to realize that present scientific orthodoxy is a rather flimsy, it's another ideology, it's another mythology, and it's not even that convincing of one. It's rather flimsy, and it has its usefulness, it has its place. I'm probably in a point right now where my pendulum has swung in a direction of becoming so disillusioned with its shadows and blind spots that I'm have a more like anti-science energy about me than I'll probably have a few months from now, because I need to reintegrate more of the value of science. But I do feel really deeply that perceiving these blind spots and these shadows and perceiving the insufficiency of any conceptual map is a huge aspect of humanity's current challenge if we want to overcome the rivalrous games that have kept us locked into basically just perpetual infighting and, this kind of dominator separation based culture that we're in. So
So I have
yeah.
a
Whew.
question. I know I want to be respectful of your time. When you have such a broad, and this is something I struggle with myself, so I want to hear your thoughts. When you have such a broad understanding, or you know how much you don't know about the universe and the nature of reality, and yet you still, I still get caught up in Twitter arguments sometimes, and you still have to go pick up your dog poo in the in the yard, and how do you like integrate, like where do you hang out most of the time? Is it in this big kind of expansive view of the cosmos and reality and your understanding of the connections and integration between everything, or have you found a way to really integrate the big and the small in your daily life?
Mm.
I find that I kind of go, it's like I have times like when I do my meditation and stuff, it's like I'm there, but then a lot of times, especially recently now with being in the lockdown, I find I'm way more in the 3D world than I would like to be. And my integration is not as good as it should be.
Mm. Yeah, it's a super good, interesting question. I would say it depends on my environment. I've been nomadic for like 7 years, been all over the world. And so I've really seen with more clarity than most people the extent to which environment affects me and the extent to which the people I'm around affect me. Because we're basically always, whether we know it or not, trying to pull each other into our particular reality tunnel or our particular frequency. You just can't really even have a conversation with someone without somehow meeting in some kind of reality tunnel that has a decent amount of overlap. And so either you're pulling the person more into your reality tunnel or they're pulling you more into their reality tunnel. So this is why it's so fundamentally important to really surround yourself with people who are like living in a reality similar to the one you want to live in. Otherwise, you're going to follow that old entrepreneurial axiom that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. That axiom holds a lot of truth, and this is why. And so I notice really deeply how who I'm around really shapes like what dimensions of my being are called forth just organically. It's a process that can't be helped. And this is why, soon I'm going to be moving to Costa Rica. I'm establishing a new base there and I have different, kind of friends in that area. I think Costa Rica is almost becoming like a new mecca for conscious entrepreneurs to kind of start birthing a new paradigm for humanity. So I'm excited about that, excited to be in that aligned environment. um, I would say in general, I have really deeply integrated just like this fundamental sense of kind of the magic of reality. So I think I rarely take reality for granted. Like every day to me is basically a miracle. I mean, I'm just really in touch with the fundamental something rather than nothing, and with like the opportunity and the gift of life. So that's kind of there. And I don't I don't deliberately spend too much time like in this massive conceptual web of integrating all these different understandings. That's something that's like been synthesized and come about as a result of just a lot of deep study and reading and learning, and also just direct experience of the world most fundamentally over the years, and then reading people to help me make sense of my direct experiences, and then synthesizing, this map. But I don't spend too much time lost in the map these days. I would say it's like the map gets called forth if someone like you is asking me these particular questions. But my current mode is more like, I think a really good heuristic is that all you ever need to know in life is the next aligned action. All you ever need to do is take the next aligned action, because we're always, as humans, always existing only in the now, and there's always only one thing we can do at a time. So the only question you ever need to answer is, what is the next aligned action to take? And so, and if that is unclear, then my answer is then just be still until it becomes clear. Just don't do anything and wait till it becomes clear, and then take the next aligned action. So once you're really deeply rooted in the now and you realize like you don't have to figure anything out barely except for the very next aligned action, it's just like kind of a huge sigh of relief in the game of life. It's like, oh, well, that's not very hard. And so I tend to just be really focused on the next aligned action for me. And lately that means like I've been increasingly really immersed in my creative projects. I feel a lot wanting to come through this year. And I think that base in Costa Rica is going to be really integral, foundational ground and soil from which to birth the things that want to come through. So I'm just focused on, I spent a lot of time in the last year actually more like kind of, you could say like connecting to the realm of the absolute, like the realm of emptiness that lies beyond the world of form, and just kind of dissolving into the ether, and exploring my being beyond the confines of this particular ephemeral ape identity that I'm currently occupying. And so spent a lot of time out there. But this year with Corona and with a number of other things seem to be orchestrating this perfect kind of rite of passage to bring me back to earth and to just tell me like, okay, it's really time to ground these more like astral understandings and mystical visions into more real world building and action and creating, because that's really needed now. And so yeah, that's what I find myself engaging in now then, is just starting to dig in more and more, and like just feel myself going all in on a deeper level on like grounding my understandings up here in real world tangible earthly projects. And yeah, just beginning to dig in and build what I see as the new paradigm. So
That's great. I really like that you know how you think about things and then somebody just says it's slightly different and it just opens up something new. Well, usually every year I come up with an intention. And so my intention this year was surrender, because I spend a lot of my time like striving for things. And I was like, no, I want to just step back. And part of surrender was being in that moment. So for you to say like the next aligned action, that just was like, oh, that's exactly like the wording that I was, connecting to in this idea of surrender, and just, yeah, uh, just surrendering to the moment of now. So I love that. Well, I want to, like I said, honor your time. So I think I'll stop it here, but that was a fantastic conversation. I would love to do it again sometime.
yeah, me too. Maybe I can just leave everyone with something else that came up at one point in this, which was just to say, like, I really have a deep sense that everyone carries a piece of the puzzle, and that a big part of the transition we're going through is people taking their power back that they've given away, their truth and power and authority that they've given away to these external figures. It's time to really re-own our power, re-own our truth. And so I would really encourage anyone listening to this to really activate yourself as a student of nature, activate yourself as a sense maker, realize that your truth, what you see, your intuition has importance, has value. Most fundamentally, your inner intuitive compass of truth is the most fundamentally valuable orienting mechanism that you have in your reality. Do not devalue it. Do not give it away. Activate yourself, value yourself, and let's create a more beautiful world.
Yes. And I would say too that if you're having a hard time discerning what that is, taking a step back, like you said, going into silence, um, getting away from the noise, whether that's online or, just so that you can hear that much more clearly. And yes, and if somebody says something, you don't need to believe it on blind faith. You get to have that and hold it and sit with it and explore how that, what your intuitive sense of that is, using your discernment, and yes, not just accepting authority wherever it is, and getting back in touch with your sense making apparatus, which is really, like I said, malfunctioning right now for so many people. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm glad that you reached out to me on Twitter. Like I said, you just have a really good way of bringing the mind and the heart together, the mystical and the material. And yeah, I'm excited. Best of luck on your move. Hopefully we'll chat before then, but yes, thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.